What is self-improvement? Is it ever complete? And is there a line? To dissect this question from a philosophical lens, we will consider the philosophies of two of history's most influential philosophers, Marcus Aurelius and Friedrich Nietzsche. While there might not be opposites in philosophical ideologies in the traditional sense of opposites, one could make the case that Stoicism and nihilism are on opposite sides of the philosophical spectrum. Today, we are going to look to the ideas of these two juggernauts of thought, analyze their ideas against the theories of self-improvement, and finally, compare their differences. Let's first break down the question, what is self-improvement? The idea of self-improvement is different to everyone, and their first thought of the matter might give insight into what they think of themselves. To take the question further, though, is self-improvement ever complete? This part of the question asks, is there an end goal? Is there a point in which one knows they have achieved self-improvement? And finally, is there a line to self-improvement? This question seeks to analyze the crossroads of self-improvement and selfish ambition. When does the pursuit of self-improvement delve into self-centeredness or even exploitation? Some philosophies, at a shallow glance, almost appear to be anti-self-improvement. Consider Taoism and the story of Zhuangzi being offered the kingdom while fishing. Instead of jumping at the opportunity, which most might consider a case of self-improvement, at least in the area of circumstance, he instead gives an analogy of a dead turtle in a temple. He asks the two emissaries, would this turtle rather be dead in the temple or dragging its tail in the mud? The two emissaries reply that the turtle would rather be in the mud. Zhuangzi agrees and dismisses the emissaries, comparing himself to the turtle. While Taoism might not be literally anti-self-improvement, it does contain strong implications of moderation and going with the flow. But what do Marcus Aurelius and Friedrich Nietzsche have to say on the matter? Do their philosophies echo these sentiments of going with the flow in any way? Popular Stoicism seems to imply relentless pursuit of self-improvement, and nihilism tells us that nothing matters, right? Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 CE and ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 CE. Machiavelli called him the last of the 5 good emperors. Aurelius practiced Stoicism, a philosophy that taught that virtue was the only good and vice was the only bad, and that everything else is indifferent. Things like poverty and sickness are examples of these indifferent, and it is argued that ultimately these in themselves don't make us happy or sad, as they are neither good or bad. Some Stoics do believe, however, there are preferable indifferents, that if given the choice of health or sickness, richness or poorness, one would choose health and richness. The question is then, why? Another tenet of Stoicism is to do what is according to nature. To quote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Marcus Aurelius directly, as I think it does the best of explaining this idea. Cicero gives one reason why there must be value differences among indifferents. If everything aside from virtue and vice were absolutely indifferent, the perfected rationality of the Stoic wise person would have no function to carry out. Wisdom's exercise would consist in flipping coins to select one indifferent over another. Now, we aren't here to analyze Stoicism or even Aurelius' take or practices of Stoicism, but rather to answer, what did Aurelius say about self-improvement, if anything? For this, we can look to his writings, known today as the Meditations. Aurelius knew the importance of self-improvement, and we see this theme right away in Meditations, Book 1, Section 7. Aurelius starts Meditations essentially giving credit to his mentors and those who have influenced him, and he gives credit to Rusticus for making him aware his character required improvement and discipline. He goes on to list several examples, such as not writing speculatively, not delivering hortatory orations, or even displaying himself as a man of discipline. What does Aurelius have to say about self-improvement and spirituality? As it turns out, he's not quiet on the topic. With this being said, his thoughts and meditations echo that of a traditional Stoic view on religion for the time. While Aurelius was not a Christian, in fact, it is debated if he actively persecuted them, or rather at least knowingly allowed it, he did believe in a higher power, what is referred to as Logos. While he worshipped the Roman gods, his belief in the Logos is similar to that of the belief of there being one true God. Regardless of what Aurelius personally believed about the Roman gods or a single god, he does convey that spiritual health and self-improvement is important. In Meditations, Book 6, Section 30, Marcus says to be God-fearing. Throughout the meditation, Marcus stresses how important piety is. Aurelius even touches the topic of prayer, and throughout Meditations, Marcus reflects how it is better not to pray for something you do not have, but rather to pray for contentment with what you do have. To Aurelius, self-improvement isn't just something that one does within, or through outward actions like going to the gym or saving for your future. It requires one to be humble and to listen. We see this in Meditations, Book 6, Section 21, when Marcus writes, "If any man is able to convince me and show me that I do not think or act right, I will gladly change, for I seek the truth by which no man was ever injured." And going back to the beginning of Meditations, Aurelius is thanking everyone who has had an impact on him. He does this as he has actively learned all his life from others, taken their lessons and applied them in his own life. Simply put, according to Marcus, no. Self-improvement is a journey that is never-ending. In the frame of Marcus's Stoic Philosophies, to say anything other than no would fly in the face of everything he writes. It's akin to trying to divide by zero in mathematics. It doesn't compute with the rules of math, at least in our chosen number system. Marcus says to not grow weary of correcting yourself. Similarly, to say one's journey is complete is to imply perfection. This idea is beyond incompatible with Stoicism itself. Despite the journey never coming to an end, Marcus tells us repeatedly that living a simple life is one that leads to happiness. In Book 6, Section 30 of Meditations, he actually tells us to stay simple. And in Book 7, Section 67, he says very little is needed to live a happy life. Aurelius never, at least that I read in my research for this project, explicitly stated that there is a line that one should not cross in their pursuit of their self-improvement. However, it is clear in Aurelius's ethics that to take advantage of or cross someone in the pursuit of yourself would not only cross a line, so to speak, but actively go against his ethics and what it means to be a Stoic. Aurelius never needed to say it. We can go back to the beginning. The line of self-improvement is virtue and living according to nature. Aurelius says in Book 2, Section 1, "For we are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another, then, is contrary to nature, and it is acting against one another to be vexed and to turn away." Friedrich Nietzsche was a German philosopher who lived from 1844 to 1900. At the age of 24, he was invited to be a professor of philology at the University of Basel, making him the youngest to ever get offered this position. His teacher, Friedrich Wilhelm Ritschl, wrote in his letter of reference that Nietzsche was so promising that he will simply be able to do anything he wants to do. While saying Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic is easy, it's not as simple with Nietzsche. Aurelius did not pioneer any new ideas, but rather lived a radically Stoic life while running the Roman Empire and writing it down with no intention of publication. Nietzsche, on the other hand, did pioneer thought and greatly contributed to the advancement of philosophy. It's not as simple as declaring what philosophy Nietzsche practiced, like with Aurelius, but he is most associated with existentialism and nihilism, the latter being the philosophy he is most associated with. Both schools of philosophy share a general idea that there is no meaning in life. Where they differ is existentialism says one can create or find his own meaning, whereas nihilism says you cannot it's pointless. This is, of course, an extremely simplified overview. This sounds bleak, and with Nietzsche being mostly associated with nihilism, how does he define self-improvement? Does he have anything to say on the matter at all? Nietzsche believed that our morals beyond authority, being the law, our parents, religion, were not only baseless, but harmful. It was our duty, he suggested, to reject what we know and to reconstruct ourselves. While he might not have called it self-improvement outright, this is the base of Nietzsche's self-improvement theory. Building on this, Nietzsche's value creation theories do not follow traditional philosophical thoughts on value, in the sense that values are traditionally compared to desires, where both are positive thoughts towards something, but the concept of value lacks desire. A quote from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy puts it well when it says, "Consider, if I become convinced that something I valued is not in fact valuable, that discovery is normally sufficient to provoke me to revise my value, suggesting that valuing must be responsive to the world. By contrast, subjective desires often persist even in the face of my judgment that their objects are not properly desirable or are unattainable." Nietzsche challenges this and insists that value is created rather than discovered. Whereas virtue is a goal to strive for in Stoicism, one of Nietzsche's goals, if you will, is power. While there is still much debate on discussing Nietzschean philosophy, some interpret power in the broad sense of growth, strength, power expansion, being the natural aim that all men are intrinsically drawn to, and that rather than try to avoid them, one should lean into them. Additionally, the will to power has been described as a drive towards overcoming resistance. Nietzsche famously said, "God is dead." In his book, The Gay Science, Nietzsche writes, "The belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable. Everything that was built upon this faith, propped up by it, grown into it, including the whole of our European morality, is destined for collapse." This is his commentary on the state of morality being tied to religion at the time, that it was no longer stable, but rather moral and lost. But does this mean that spirituality or self-improvement in the matter was irrelevant to Nietzsche? Not necessarily. Nietzsche was very critical of religion itself, primarily for the institutions they built, that of, in Nietzsche's mind, dishonesty, guilt, and a culture of weakness and slave morality. And while Nietzsche expressed skepticism over the ideas of the self and soul, he didn't altogether reject these ideas. Rather, he internalizes them and frames them as something that is to be built or achieved. Broadly stated, Nietzschean self-improvement philosophy is internal. What can you do for yourself? While Nietzsche's philosophies might not be inherently self-improvement related, at least in the sense of what we think of the matter in the modern day, it is safe to say that Nietzsche might say one's journey is never complete. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche writes, "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end." While Nietzschean philosophy can be difficult to interpret, and with Nietzsche's views on power and noble morality, meaning some men are excellent and some are not, one could be inclined to assume Nietzsche might endorse taking advantage of others. However, Nietzsche placed a large emphasis on honesty. He also connects truthfulness and courage, and the lack of such to be cowardice. With this, one might then say, no, Nietzsche would not endorse taking advantage of others for his own gain. Despite rejecting religious-based morality, he did not reject morals altogether. In his will to power ideals, it is often misunderstood that Nietzsche is advocating for one to impose their will onto others. However, what this theory is really about is the will over oneself. And ultimately, Nietzsche's self-improvement philosophies can really be summarized as, what can you do for yourself? Both Aurelius and Nietzsche's philosophies have self-improvement aspects to them. However, Stoicism has risen to the top as the self-improvement philosophy for a reason. It's simple, easily digestible, and immediately implementable. Parts of Stoicism, one might even argue most, are easy to understand and easy to consume. While Stoicism isn't cookie-cutter by any means, it's generally accessible and offers ways of living that broadly apply to a large general audience. It can be picked up by most, and Aurelius's works specifically have been translated to more simple versions, such that anyone could understand them. Nietzsche, simply put, is not simple, at least to most, myself included. Often, while researching Nietzsche philosophy, his ideas were explained not always from his context, as often there was none, at least without having to read many of his other books and papers, but rather his thoughts were explained from the context of usually several other researchers, most of whom had different opinions of what Nietzsche was really trying to say. Because of this, it can prove difficult for the otherwise casual reader to interpret Nietzsche through a self-improvement lens. Even so, it is there. Whichever philosopher's ideals you end up reaching for ultimately depends on you. One might be drawn to Nietzsche if they are struggling with nihilism and the feeling like they have no purpose. Nietzsche often criticized nihilism and sought to overcome it through oneself. Others might be drawn to the writings of Aurelius if they find themselves taking stock in what others think or say, or perhaps they don't like their emotional responses to situations. Aurelius does not preach to suppress one's emotions, but rather to acknowledge them, but to make the conscious choice of how one will react. While Aurelius states one should live not according to themselves, but rather to nature, and that true self-improvement is simple, needing little for happiness, Nietzsche calls for us to create our own meaning and to reinvent ourselves, to strive to power through relentless honesty, and to reject a slave morality and religious-based morals for what you have created. Ultimately, both champions of philosophy have contributed greatly, even if not directly or intentionally, to self-improvement theory. The only thing left is to ask yourself, what is self-improvement?